I feel like this podcast has taken this tremendous kind of evolution in the last little while. It started off when I was just talking about, the principles I live my life by, and then we went into like the what are the issues we're facing today, and then we went into all the issues we're facing today, and then we went back down to just about focusing on the one and here, and what do I need to solve my problems day to day? How do I get to tomorrow? What's it look like a year from now? And encompassing that crafting a life, there's so many topics. The topics are unlimited to us. Last week, as you'll recall, I had a very special guest, Rabbi Remy Zippel, and he had experienced childhood sexual abuse from the age of 8 to 18 at the hands of his nanny in his home. And that episode was so powerful, and I could feel the pain of that young boy and his tremendous healing journey. I was called to invite one of the experts on to talk about this just at a deeper level in terms of not necessarily his experience base, but his experience base in terms of this is what he does professionally. This is what he has in place. This is what the world is responding to this problem. And so to that end, I would love to have you welcome with me Chris Yadon from the Saprea Foundation, or Saprea Organization Foundation.
Both are great, Mary.
Okay, great. Both are great. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
It's so good to be with you, Mary, my friend. I love spending time with you, and any moment I get to spend with you is a great moment, and this will be too.
You and I have been friends now for, I don't know, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
And from the moment that I joined with my friend Cynthia Gamble to really help lift this organization, foundation, and to shine a light. Because that is what we're trying to do here, is shine a light on a problem that has been up to now, kept under the pillow, under the rug. And that's what you spend your life doing, is shining the light and holding it high. So let's start from the beginning, because most people might know you as the Unique Foundation, and then you became Saprea. And let's talk about your actual mission, and then some more specifics. So let's start with that, Chris.
Yeah, so we exist and we work every day to liberate both individuals and society from child sexual abuse and its lasting impacts. And it's really important to understand that there are two parts there.
Yeah.
There's helping individuals, but there's also the broad social change of helping society be liberated as well. Yeah. That's what you're talking about when you're talking about sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah.
So that's the mission we live by. That's what we focus on, and we'd love to do it every day.
And as I spoke with the rabbi last week, that for me, there is a third mission that I have yet to talk to you about, but I'm going to talk to you about it today.
Let's do it.
And that is, I met Rabbi at the symposium that you hosted at Saprea. And I loved that he was up there on that panel discussion. And as I was listening to that panel, the thought came to me, Chris, so how do we end this? We have lots of tools now to help with healing. We have lots of tools now to help with, not just surviving, but thriving. And we talk about that at Saprea a lot. But how do we stop the cycle? And then you now have a part of your company that's called Defend Innocence. And I love that when we're teaching and educating the children. I became one of those educators. I went to the classwork at Saprea so that I could actually teach my children at churches, at schools, wherever I was needed. But also, I know you and I both know that there's a step beyond that, and that is healing the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And that day I sat there in my seat and just wept, thinking about perhaps the need is that we have to stop seeing them as perpetrators, but as victims also. And how do we heal those potential perpetrators and even those who are now stuck in it? There must be a huge chunk of them who want out, who want help, but don't know where to get help once they're a perpetrator. And there's no
Yeah.
safe place for that. When they come and confess that, we lock them up.
Yep.
I, okay, so we're going to save that piece for the end. But now you know it's coming, okay?
All right. Fair enough.
All
I'll
right.
take it.
So let's start with your first mission. And I love that, the way that you said that you had kind of this twofold mission. And so let's start with the first part about those people who have already become victims and who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And what is your part in healing those people?
So at our organization, we focus specifically on adult women who were sexually abused as children.
Yeah.
So we don't focus on children who are currently going through abuse or adults who experienced adult violence and are trying to recover. We focus specifically on adults who were abused as children, and it
Yeah.
never got dealt with, it never got treated. And the most common impact of that, when we talk about impacts, those lasting impacts, is post traumatic stress. They experience
Yeah.
post traumatic stress. So our interventions highly focused on helping them learn how to reduce that post traumatic stress and learn how to manage it when it does surface. So we have various services, both in person and virtually, that survivors can engage with to help them learn how to reduce that post-traumatic stress and learn how to manage the post-traumatic stress when it does surface.
I was just at a meeting with just for open honesty here. I serve on their advisory council for Saprea, and at one of these meetings, they said that an independent company had done a survey with those people who had gone through your retreat program, and there was a 37% reduction in post-traumatic stress syndrome. Can you imagine just in a retreat such as that, and then all of a sudden nearly 40% of your life is different, is less, and you are now going from 100% craziness to 60%. That must be an incredible impact that you're having. I just think about even in my life, and I don't have that kind of stress, even though I have stress. But what if
Mm-hmm.
somebody could say, by doing this for 4 days, you could improve your life by nearly 37, nearly 40%? Would I go?
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's life changing for Mary, and the research you're referring to was done out of two universities, researchers out of two universities, and they started that research in 2018, and we've continued to research it through today. So not only did the initial research that got published demonstrate that type of impact, but as we've tracked it in subsequent years, we're maintaining that type of impact. And there's a cool thing on the opposite side of that too. One of the other indicators we look at is how does it impact the individual's ability to manage the symptoms when they do surface. We call that well-being indicators or life satisfaction
Yeah.
indicators, and those have increased by 45% on average. So
Unbelievable. That's almost
yeah,
half, 50%.
yeah, you're getting a reduction in how often the post-traumatic stress surfaces, and
And
then you're
triggers
getting an
you. Yeah.
increase, yeah, in the ability to cope with it when it does. So what does that look like in the real world? So say I'm on my way home from work, I stop by the grocery store, and maybe this woman is, just doing her shopping, minding her own business, walking down the aisle, and someone walks by them and she smells something that
Yeah.
reminds them of their perpetrator. That can trigger a biological response. So basically, what we're saying is those triggers happen 37% less. But if she did get triggered there, rather than going into a panic attack, that 45% increases. I'm 45% more capable of doing a grounding exercise to manage through that and carry on my day and get my shopping done, as opposed to going into a panic attack, abandoning my cart, walking out into my car and being filled with emotion and tears. So
And it's
it
such
fundamentally
a
changes their life.
it's such a snowball effect, because when they get triggered by this, and then they might withdraw or whatever their MO is on how they cope with that. But then what happens when the kids get home? And
Yeah.
then what happens to their husband who wants to be intimate? And then what happens with, I mean, there's just this big snowball effect for them when we are constantly being triggered with just really like somebody pounding a nail in you, like, bang! Oh!
Yep.
And it's not like a pinprick. I don't mind
Yeah.
pinpricks. That just gets me pointed in the right direction. But if they're hammering nails in every single day, and as they report to us, it's hundreds of times a day,
Yeah.
right?
For many of them, that's the case.
Yeah,
It's consistent. It happens all day, every day, and they have to deal with it.
yeah. Okay, and so there's that part for the survivors who are now becoming thrivers. And then the other part of your mission is actually in the preventative area, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
The prevention side includes several things. It's primarily focused on parents and primary caregivers. So think whoever's that primary caregiver for a child, we want to connect with them and empower that
Yeah,
primary caregiver, that parent, to reduce the risk that their child will be abused, or to your other question you teed up a minute ago, reduce the risk that that child will abuse another.
yeah,
And so that prevention work is focused on both sides of that. And the great news about this is, with just a little bit of education as a parent, just a little bit of empowerment as a parent, their ability to significantly reduce the risk for their child or reduce the risk that their child will abuse others goes up significantly.
yeah,
So um, it doesn't take a heavy lift, a hard lift, and the principles that help them prevent sexual abuse actually benefit a lot of other areas as well.
yeah,
It's the same principles that will help them teach their kids to thrive in the world that we live in with topics that have nothing to do with sexual abuse. So it's a big win for parents when they engage with our education, and that's also done online. We also do it through classes like you mentioned. You got trained to teach one of some of those classes. Both are meaningful ways that parents can become educated.
your online resources are absolutely phenomenal. We've included your link to your website at the end of this podcast. People can go there and look and see what you have. The actual teaching, I mean, the actual principles that we learned in those classes are right there online. And
Yep.
the videos that we watched are right there online. Every parent and grandparent should be watching those videos. I hope to
Definitely.
shout when you show the one with the girl who went with someone to get some food, and
Yep.
he was trying to get her to do things that she wasn't consenting to, and to teach the concept of consent is so powerful. In fact, I went the other day with my 4-year-old grandson. We went to McDonald's, not my favorite spot, but his. And, it's
Yep.
all about that toy. I tell
We
you.
just do it.
I
We
tell
just
you
do
what.
it, don't we?
And so he was playing, and of course he'd eaten his nuggets, and his French fries were untouched. So Grandma was like, well, I didn't get French fries. I got a salad. So I'm going to have a few French fries. And I was just munching away. He came back over and said, Grandma, you're eating my French fries. I go, well, I didn't think you would care because you weren't going to eat them. And he
Yep.
said, I didn't give my consent. You didn't ask me. And he used that word. And my first thought was, oh, love my daughter for teaching this 4-year-old
Yeah.
the principle of consent. And so then all I had to do was, may I have a few of your French fries? Sure, Grandma. And that was it. That
Yep.
was over. But I learned a valuable lesson, to always ask someone's permission rather than assume that we have their consent. So that's a principle that really helped me in all areas of my life. And the critical thing that you are teaching of what is consent and how to say no. Wow. Because
Yeah, it's critical.
that old adage that we used to teach our children when my kids were little, who are now 40, okay, that I taught was stranger danger.
Yeah.
So tell me your thoughts on that now from a more enlightened view of what is
Sure.
stranger danger.
Yeah, we want to treat this more as an and than an or. And what I mean by that is stranger danger is still true. It's still relevant. It's just not where most abuse happens.
Yeah.
So, depending on the study you look at, it's going to be between 80 and 90% of sexual abuse happens by someone that the child and the family already knows. So, that concept that we grew up with, and I grew up in this environment of being afraid of the a creepy guy in the white van that was going to offer me candy, right? It still happens and it's horrific when it happens, but that's not where the majority of the risk is. And
Is
so
it
when
like
parents,
90%?
yeah, yeah,
90% happens by somebody you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So when parents over focus on stranger danger, they're missing a huge part of the risk, and we're not empowering our kids to be successful. So we can still teach stranger danger. That's not a bad thing.
Right.
We just need to put it in context with the broader problem, which is, hey, it's likely someone I know. It's someone I trust, and it's someone I've put my child uh, around or in an environment where they're at risk.
Yeah. And, as we learned with Remy last week, that it was, his nanny, but, the uncle, the grandfather, the father, the kid next door, your brother, your cousin. I mean, the list goes on and on of people that we have in our home that we deem safe. And so, what tools would you suggest for parents as they try to teach this concept to their children? So, yes, we're teaching stranger danger, and yes, we're teaching consent. And I know it's different in different age groups of children,
Yeah.
but what is kind of your primary focus, or you think it should be a parent's primary focus as we educate our children? How specific do we get on this?
Yeah. So very specific and age appropriate as well. So it, the principles don't change as our kids age, but the application of what exactly we teach behind those principles does change. So you brought up consent as an example, and you used the awesome story of French fries with the 4-year-old. That is a great way to teach consent at that
Yeah,
age, right?
yeah,
But before I send that 4-year-old on their first date when they're a teenager, I'm having discussions about consent as it relates to sexual behavior. I'm having discussions about how to read body language. I'm having discussions about how to take emotional cues from the person they're interacting with, how to not only set and hold their boundaries, but how to respect boundaries for the other person. So, that the principle's the same. I'm teaching consent to the 4-year-old around French fries and to my 16-year-old that's going out on their first date
yeah.
with their boyfriend or girlfriend, but the application changes. The other key principles outside of consents are bodily autonomy. So a quick funny story about that. My youngest, it's another one you can teach at a young age. You're in charge of your body. You're in charge of how you show affection. You're in charge of, your space. Well, this backfired on us, Mary, and it does as parents. So she
Yeah.
was 2, maybe 3 years old, and she had climbed up on the counter, and mom was like, "Hey, get off the counter. We don't stand on the counter." And she's like, "No." And she's like, "Yeah, you need to get off the counter. We don't stand on the counter." She's like, "It's my body and I'm in charge." Right? So, so here she is. I love it. I love that she said that, right? But you
Yes.
think it just as young, similar to your French fry story, they can learn those principles at a young age. Now, it may backfire us on us. She needed to get off the counter, right? But she understood the principle. I'm in charge of my body. And then, when she's sitting in junior high and a boy comes up and hugs her and she doesn't want it, then she's more empowered with that voice to say, no, this is my space. I get to decide
Right.
what happens with my body. And then the last big one, I mean, there's many, but we're hitting on a few of the big ones: consent, bodily autonomy. Another big one is teaching sexual health. And it's not
Ah,
about just the big talk around sex, it's about all the little talks that we need to have with our kids around sexual topics and sexual health, and how they can develop sexual health in a healthy way that
mm,
aligns with our family's values, whatever those might be. and helps them take control over their sexual health. And so helping parents learn how to embrace those conversations is a big part of our work as well.
Yeah, I ran into so many times these situations with my grandson, my youngest. He's my youngest grandson, who is 4, and I applaud his mom for teaching him these things. But the other day he was here and we were playing, and I had bought a birthday gift for his mom, and so I said to Tristan, I said, Tristan, do you want to know us? Can you keep a secret? No, I don't keep secrets. And I'm like, well, I bought, I'll show you this thing I bought for your mom, but you can't tell her. He goes, no, we don't do that in our family. We don't keep
Yeah,
secrets. My mom has told me. And I said, okay, well, maybe grandma shouldn't show you right now. And you can see on Sunday when your mom opens your present. So he
yeah.
probably went home to his, told his mom, grandma asked me to keep a secret. You know what I mean? So she calls
That's
me.
yeah,
And I'm like, okay, I understand the principle. And I will find another word for that.
yeah,
But I love that teaching that they're doing at that age as he's in preschool now, and
yeah.
what that looks like, and what happens when someone asks you to keep a secret. Rabbi Zippel last week talked about something that I don't think I had thought about as much. And he talked about that it wasn't that someone had asked him to keep a secret. It was that someone had groomed him
Hmm.
for this situation, and that happened through flattery.
Yep.
And I asked him, what do we do? How, as parents, do we have that not affect our children? And he said something so interesting. He said, we are not going to be, we just have to accept that fact. We're not going to be able to protect our children 100% from every single situation that might come up. And he said, we do our best. We teach all these principles that you and I have talked about. But in the end, there might be something. And so children need to be empowered to trust their parents enough to share. And
Yep.
that's come from always giving them validation that you trust them and that you value them and that what they say is important. And I began to think about that as we parent and as we grandparent, to listen, to listen in. How how do you teach that, Chris?
Such a powerful question, and I love what Rabbi Zippel said, that it's because it's about risk reduction, not risk elimination.
Yeah.
As long as we interact with humans, there's going to be risk, but we can reduce the risk. And going back to one of the previous things we talked about, this is why we focus on topics like sexual health. Because when a child's being flattered, if they don't understand about sexual health and what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what's appropriate, inappropriate, they may be being abused and they have no idea they're being abused.
Right.
And that's very, very common with kids, that they are experiencing abuse and they don't even know it's abuse. And so they might keep it quiet out of shame or out of a threat or because they were asked to keep a secret, whatever the reason they keep it, or because they feel flattered, they feel special, they've been groomed. But when we start having dialogue around things like sexual health, bodily autonomy, consent, it gives our children words to share with us. And when we couple that with a healthy relationship with our kids, they're much more likely to talk or speak up when something's not going right and allows us to intervene. Because a big part of the prevention equation is early intervention. Whether actual abuse has occurred or not, or they're still in that grooming stage, if we can intervene earlier, the chances that they'll experience the long-term post-traumatic stress goes down significantly. So maybe we catch it when that adult that's grooming them starts giving them a back rub, long before they've, you know, touched them in an area that they may consider private. And in that case, what's happening is it's giving them an opportunity to say, hey, I'm being touched this way and I'm not really comfortable with it. What should I do?
Yeah.
How should I respond? And that's when mom and dad have a chance to intervene.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I had a situation like that with my two boys. Uh, we were giving them a bath, and one of them just said, you know, a neighbor next door. And he was, well, I don't know, 5 years older than they were. And he just said, so and so's penis is so big.
Yeah.
And he said, my penis is so little.
Yep.
And I was just like, oh, pardon me, not to overact and just sit here calmly, finish giving them baths and just ask them to talk about it and say, oh, what does he mean? Did he show you his penis?
Yep.
Rather than just going, what has happened here?
Yeah.
and
Yep.
and then went down and talked to his parents, and the crazy thing that they said was, we were so afraid this was going to happen because this is what happened to him when
Yep.
he was their age.
Yep.
So let's talk about that, Chris. So we've talked about, healing when the situation happens. We've talked about um, preventing with our children. But what about that perpetrator? How are we touching him? How are we
Yeah.
breaking this cycle?
It's a great question. The first thing to break that cycle, we have to understand where abuse comes from, and it comes from diverse places. Almost half of child sexual abuse is actually a minor on another minor. So think a teen sexually assaulting a teen, or an older teenager, maybe a 14-year-old abusing a 7, 8, 9-year-old. That's very different than a 30-year-old pedophile. And how you intervene
Yes.
and deal with that
Yes.
situation are completely different situations. One thing we do know, generally speaking, and this isn't true 100% of the time, but generally speaking, individuals who abuse others are dealing with something traumatic from their own life. It's not always sexual abuse. They could be, maybe they grew up in a neglectful environment, or they were physically abused, or maybe they had a parent die when they were 5 years old. Some
Mm.
traumatic event has
Yeah.
likely occurred in their life. They didn't deal with it, or it got dealt with in an unhealthy way. And at some point, they attached sexual behavior as a coping mechanism to deal with their trauma. So the fundamental answer to how do we stop perpetrators from becoming perpetrators is built in how how do we help children when they go through trauma actually heal? And if we can solve that, we really reduce the inflow of people that become perpetrators, whether that's as a teen or an adult. And so, if we're really going to deal with that part of the problem, we have to go to the root, which is they experience childhood trauma. Let's deal with that in a healthy way when they're a child. Let's not sweep it under the rug. And let's make sure that they get the help that they need as children so they don't have to use maladaptive coping mechanisms to deal with their own experience. And when we do
Mm.
that, we give them a chance to succeed without falling into these unhealthy behaviors.
I think about what the dialogue looked like around this kind of thing when I was growing up. First of all, it was never talked about. And if it was talked about, it was, I can remember in conversations where you would overhear adults talking. My parents had a card club, and so and they would come and sit around these card tables, and just talk, talk, talk. And I was supposed to be up in my room, but I was always on the stairway. And
Yep.
I can remember
Listening in,
hearing,
weren't you?
yeah, yeah, always. I can remember hearing that there was some sort of a problem. And then one of the women said, well, if you just don't ever mention it again, they're so young, they're going to forget about it.
Yeah.
And I
They don't
remember
forget about it.
hearing that. At what age do you forget and not remember? And now, as adults, we spend our whole life trying to remember what was it? And the other thing you said that was so interesting to me was, I always thought that if they became sexual perpetrators, chances are they were a sexual victim at some point. But you say that's not necessarily the case. It could be any childhood trauma.
Yep, it can, and it can be broad and be many different reasons. It's kind of a misnomer that if you're sexually abused yourself that you're likely to sexually abuse others. Very few people that are sexually abuse others,
Ah,
uh, and there's not a direct. Uh, I mean, there's some correlation there, but there's certainly not direct causation between the two.
hmm, interesting. This topic is, may I just say, so broad. There are so many pieces to it, Chris.
Yeah,
I, I have to say, Derek and Shalane Maxfield, who are the founders of Saprea, and Shalane is, the you call her the president, CEO,
she's our board chair and
board chair.
founder.
There you go, and founder. Yeah, um, she is so passionate about this, and it just seems like every time we turn around, there's another piece to this, and another piece to this, and another piece to this. I was recently talking to a group called, you may know them, My Story Matters, and they deal with prison inmates who are helping them tell their story and that their story did matter. And she told me that nearly 100% of those people had been sexually abused when they were children.
Yeah.
And so this far reaching nature in our society is, well, you can't even comprehend it. It's such a big task you're about. As we, okay, go ahead. You had a comment on that.
No, no, I just want to validate what you're saying is there are so many secondary issues we see every day, whether it's incarceration, substance abuse, eating disorders, suicide, that have roots in childhood trauma. Now, not all sexual abuse trauma, but so many of them have roots in childhood trauma. And we need to deal with these secondary issues. We need to help people that are incarcerated heal. But if we are forever just focused on the secondary layer, meaning the impacts of that trauma, and don't actually deal with the trauma, we're never really going to make progress as a society. So we've got to go deal with the roots, why we're helping those that have experienced trauma heal from, a suicide attempt, or heal from an eating disorder, or heal from a substance abuse challenge that they have. We don't have the luxury of just saying, you guys just deal with it. We're going to focus on the childhood trauma. But we also don't have the luxury of saying, hey, if we help people that are incarcerated, we're going to solve the problem, because we're
Right,
not. We
right.
we have another set of children that are going to fall right into the problem if we don't deal with that early childhood trauma.
Yeah, it's a pretty massive issue that affects not just, our society. Well, and let's talk about that. We live here in Utah, and
Yep.
it's the percentages are the same for us as anywhere else in this country.
Yep.
So it's not like, well, that doesn't happen here, because it happens everywhere. And not just here in the United States, but we're talking about the global problem that this is, and healing that. That's when I start getting hyperventilating. Give me a bag, give me a bag. I'm hyperventilating. The problem is so big.
Yeah.
So let's just bring it back down to you and me and my listeners and those mothers, those fathers who want to make a difference, who want to stop the cycle. What do we do?
Well, first we need to understand, to deal with those overwhelming feelings, we need to understand how change happens in our world. When you look at any historical societal change, whether it's drunk driving awareness, or car seat safety, or smoking cessation, any broad area where there's been
Yeah.
a big change in society.
And there has
That,
been a big change in
yes,
those. Yeah.
right. And someone at the beginning of those movements was saying the same thing, like, it's too big. How do we, right? Here's the reality. When individuals take care of their close systems, those family systems. So in the case of a parent, a mom, a dad, or a mom and a dad together, or whatever your family looks like, uh, when that family unit takes ownership, it puts a barrier of protection around that child. Then when you get a community, whether that's that family's school community, whether it's their faith community, whether it's their uh, actual physical neighborhood, when you get a community of families that are willing to do that, that
Yeah.
child gets a whole nother barrier of protection about them. And then when those communities come together, of different communities doing that, to a geographic region like a state, then a state starts paying it, right? And then a country, and then a world. So there's no such thing as
Yeah.
we're going to solve this in the world by focusing on the world. You
Yeah.
have to focus
It's,
on my family,
yeah.
my neighborhood, my immediate community, and those in other communities around you need to do the same. And when you do it together, you start seeing broad changes. That's how broad societal change happens.
Yeah.
There's always that critical grassroots component. So what I would say to a parent listening to this, or a grandparent, is start by educating yourself. Go to our website, saprea.org, spelled SAPREA. Go to our website, learn about the issue. Pick up one or two resources that you can then take into your family and use, and start creating that first barrier of protection around your family. When you feel like you have a hold of that a little bit, all of us engage in communities. Go find one of your communities, whether again that's you're in the PTA, or maybe you're in you have got kids in an elementary school, or you're in a church congregation. Go find that next layer of community, and once you've got a hold of it, be an advocate for others to
Yeah.
also get a hold of it. Say, hey, I found these great resources. They've really helped my family. I want you guys to have them too. And that's how
I love
change
that.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chris. I mean, because I lived through all of those changes. Yeah, when I was growing up, the seatbelt was your mother's arm.
Yep.
You know, when she stopped, she just do this number, and I can remember thinking this. They came about. Seatbelts came about when I was in high school,
Yep.
and late high school, and my mom saying, it literally it wrinkles my dress.
Mm.
you know,
Yep.
but really within a decade, you've got 85% of the country wearing seatbelts. It
Yep.
happened, and I
Yep.
think about the awareness of drunk driving and cigarettes. I can remember getting on an airplane and it was so smoky that you would just cough the whole way. And now we aren't allowed to smoke on airplanes. I mean,
Yep.
it's crazy, that kind of change. What makes this one different, though, Chris, and you and I both know this, if this is around an area of sexual abuse,
Yep.
sexual problems, which we are even now way less likely to be comfortable with talking about. It's one
Yep.
thing to talk about somebody's smoking problem or their drinking problem. It's another thing to talk about their problems with, sex addictions and pornography.
Yep.
So somehow we have to be able to say those words and open up the conversation. Wow.
But it's happening, Mary.
But it is
Even
happening.
that's happening.
It
So this
is.
does it does carry some extra weight of shame and stigma. But in the short 8 years I've been involved on this particular area and this particular organization, it has changed drastically. People's willingness to discuss
Yeah.
the issue. No one's like, "Hey, I'm so excited to come talk about sexual abuse today." But 8 years ago, people were like, "That's too sensitive. I don't," or can we talk about something else? That doesn't happen today. People
Yeah.
today are like, this is a problem. We need to pay attention to it. I'm ready to listen. So we're seeing it change right
Yep.
under our feet. And we're in the early stage of that movement. And sometimes when you're in the early stage, it feels, wow, too big, too overwhelming. But it, if we'll just follow the patterns of what other movements have done, the way that they've fought stigmas or changes, or how they need to engage the public, we will have the same success they've had.
Yeah.
And we'll wake up years from now, look back and go, I was a part of that and I did something about that.
I was a part of that, and I did something about it. You know that I stand with Saprea. I do everything I can to support your organization and this quest to heal our planet. And you're right, Chris. It can't start anywhere other than with one, right
Yep.
here. And
Yep.
thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing some really tough stuff, but some really heartwarming stuff of the hope and the actual, now it's kind of more than just hope, the
Yep.
actual healing of our planet on this issue. And what you're doing here locally and globally the impact of your organization is pretty phenomenal, and I'm honored to stand beside you.
Well, I'm honored to be with you, and thanks for having me. We do have a lot to hope for, Mary.
We do. Thanks so much for joining us on Crafting a Meaningful Life. And as you can see, now we have one more thing to put in our quiver to help us live this best life that we've promised ourselves we're going to be about. And you can share this with others. I would share this podcast with everyone you know, to all your children. Hey, maybe you should listen to this. If you're a grandmother, if you're a mother, make sure that you have your husband listen. I mean, there are so many people you can share this with as you craft your meaningful life. Namaste.
Listen to the full podcast today and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and more. Crafting a Meaningful Life with Mary Crafts.